So, all right. Hello, everybody. Just want to welcome everybody to the 2019 season. We're very excited to get this team of Gopher Football off and running. And, this is I'm very excited about this team. And I hope that everybody knows why and can see it. Last year we were youthful and inexperienced, which not necessarily the greatest combination you can possibly have. But now I think we're still youthful, but we're experienced. And I mean that in terms of the best way possible. I think that's why I love this team so much. Our senior leadership is really good. And we've got some really good players that are upperclassmen. And then we've got some really dynamic players that are younger as well. A lot of you have had a chance to listen to Big Ten Media Day. So I was told by some of you to keep the opening comments as short as I possibly could so I can answer your questions. So this year I'll respect that, Andy. There you go. So we'll definitely do that. I won't take up the time, but I'm really excited about this football team in 2019, and hopefully you all know why as you continue to look at us. But very excited to get the season kicked off, and when you walk down the hallway and see that light in your players' eyes and they're ready to go and they're smiling, it's an exciting time for Gopher football.
Last year you talked about kind of a refuse to lose goal. What is the goal? What is the mantra?
Well, we talked about, refusing to lose last year. Remember, that was that race to maturity. Doing what you have to do becomes doing what you want to do. A team growing up, learning how to be able to win games. That's what we talked to them about this year. It's not just the race to maturity. It's about restoring a lot of that tradition that we've had in the past, but it is about learning how to truly win games. Most games in college football are lost. And when we had our 78% statistic from last year, when we did that, we were 7-0. When we didn't do it, we were 0-6. So they had to experience the spectrum of losing in a lot of hard ways, right? But also having that failing on one side. But they also have the spectrum on the other side of they won a bowl championship. They beat Wisconsin for the first time in 14 years. They won at Camp Randall for the first time in close to 30 years, right? And so they had this wide spectrum, and you could watch that team grow up from last year. But just because we did something last year, that does not mean you're going to do something this year. Last year is not an extension of this year, or this year is not an extension of last year. That's not how we look at it. This is a team that's going to find its own ways to win. It's going to have a different identity possibly than last year and the year before that, which every team does. And we've talked to them about throughout this whole camp, the education is going to be about how games are won. How can this football team maximize the win column the best we possibly can? And that starts with winning today, being the best people we can be and the best players we can be today.
You didn't really know what to expect from your quarterbacks last fall camp. Now that both those guys, I know you have more, both Nick and Morgan. What do you expect this fall camp to see from them, or what do you want to see from them?
Well, last year we're sitting at this time, right, and we had one scholarship quarterback, right, and he was a freshman, and the other guy was a walk-on, and he was a freshman, and everybody's like, who's going to play quarterback, and how good are these guys going to be? You have to start somewhere, right? And I thought both those guys handled situations very well last year. I thought there was a lot of times where they could have done things better, but they gained a ton of experience. I mean, both guys that we have, whether it's Tanner or Zach, they started football games. They won big games for us. They won close games for us, but they also lost as well. And I think to become a champion and to be able to have a lot of success, you have to have that failing along the path to become a really successful person or a really successful quarterback. But I think they both have gotten better within the system. I think last year they were both still learning the system. And as they continue to go through, now it's a form of how can they master the system? How can we take what they both do really well and highlight that on a weekly basis? And as we get closer to naming a starter, we're going to need both of them. But when you look at what Cole's doing and what Jacob's doing, they're playing really well too. And they've got a lot to learn, and they're going to be able to close the gap pretty quickly. Those two are going to be able to do that. So went from one scholarship quarterback to 4 in 1 year, which is really good. Their sophomores are below, all of them, but it's really exciting.
Zach, did you get to see the full, what he could do, or how much did that ankle affect the way he could play?
Well, I think, yeah, that's a great question, Chip. I think that we didn't get to see what they both could do because they're still, one, really young, and they were both just learning, and it was their first year. You got to see bits and pieces, but consistently we weren't able to see what they both could truly do. I think you got a chance to see, especially at the beginning of the year when Zach started, what he could do really well and maybe what he didn't do so well. But what you want to see as a head football coach is you want to be able to see the consistency of the good take over, right? And then it becomes better play in general. Whether it's Tanner or whether it's Zach, that's what you want to be able to see. And there were times where Tanner played really well, and then times where Tanner didn't play necessarily really well. But that's the ebb and flow of having freshmen as quarterbacks, and you've got to be willing to have that. But we've got to be way more consistent from that position, whether it's completion percentage or just a consistency of play. I don't ever doubt them as leaders, but they have done a tremendous job of leading this football team at a very young age without experience last year, which was very difficult to do. Now they have that experience, and I want to see the next step that they take in leadership.
The expectations for the receiving corps should be up considerably this year.
Well, I think expectations in general are always up. I mean, that's what we've always done with any football team we've coached, for any football team I've coached. Nobody put more pressure on them than me. Nobody put more pressure on myself than myself. And I hope that nobody will put more pressure on the players than themselves. But we want expectation. We've been preparing for pressure and expectation and having this wide range, no matter what position we're talking about. We've been talking about this pressure and expectation, this range from some people think we're top 25, some people think we're 6th in the West. That is a huge spectrum, right? And we have to be ready for everything. But we've been preparing for that since January with this football team. Put him in high pressure, high expectation situations constantly, whether that's in the classroom, whether that's in the weight room, whether that's been in the social life, whether that's been through our serving and giving, and then through the football. But for the wide receivers, to answer your question, sure, they have high expectations. We have some really good players. They've all gotten better. Rashad Bateman, when you see him, I mean, he's over about 200 plus pounds now. There was a picture, I have a magazine in my office of Rashad Bateman, and he's on the cover of some Georgia magazine, and I have that in there, and I have little kind of trinkets of pretty much every player that I've recruited, somehow, some way along the way. There's something that you have in there that reminds you of them, and I mean, he looks like a string bean. He looks like he's 150 pounds, and now, I mean, he looks like a grown man, and that's credit to Dan Nickel and our strength staff. Ty Johnson's had a tremendous offseason. One, becoming a better football player, better at his craft, but he's really taken a lead and been the leader of that wide receiver room. He's really owned the room. And that's what you like to see from a mature player who's played a lot of football for you. And then you've watched Chris Bell develop, Chris Altman-Bell, and then Demetrius Douglas. Those guys have really developed a lot. And Demetrius is kind of like that Swiss Army knife. You know, Demetrius can do everything. He can play every position. He's a punt returner. He's a kick returner. He can do everything and play every position. And he's gotten better at every position. So then you add this influx of young talent as well. And it should be a really exciting competition because there's still competition everywhere. It should be really exciting to see who those wideouts emerge that are young guys who fill that 5th, 6th, 7th role, which should be a lot of fun in camp.
How will you split the quarterback reps in camp? You know, is it 50-50, 25-25, 25?
Yeah, to start, it's 50-50, right, as we continue to go through. And I even say 50-50 for the other quarterbacks, too, because they're going to get just as many reps as Tanner and Zach. So everybody has an opportunity. Now, what you do with those opportunities at the beginning of camp, they affect the next day of camp, right? And this isn't like everybody has the same amount of reps for 3 weeks and, you know, everybody's treated fairly, but not everything gets treated equally as you go perform, right? So what we need to continue to focus on is having our best players be our hardest workers. And our quarterbacks have done that. Our wideouts have done that. All the positions have done that. That's when you know your culture is really working and you can feel really good about your football team when those best players, those highlighted players, your star players, the depth players are your hardest workers. Now, all of a sudden, when those young guys come in, they have this high expectation of what it's like to be a Gopher football player, and they know the standard immediately. And that spreads throughout your entire football team. So amongst all that, I feel like we have that finally for the first time.
When talking about, you know, your quarterbacks and how maybe they didn't prove everything that they can do last year, does that maybe describe the overall vibe of this camp? That there's a lot of young players that maybe showed stuff last year, but there's an excitement to see what other can do?
Absolutely. You want to see a huge jump in growth from everything. I mean, Brevin Spanford, for instance, right, is 270 pounds now. I mean, we all know what he looked like last year, and he's kind of thin, and will he get up to the weight? He's 270. Right? So all of a sudden, these young guys have taken these huge leaps. And I say young guys, and again, that is not an excuse. I just want to make sure I'm very clear about all that. But describing my football team, I'm going to describe them exactly how they are. And when 80% of your team are freshmen and sophomores, that's a younger team, right? But sooner or later, we'll be older, and we'll be an old team. But we have our older players playing very well and leading. But as you kind of look at our football team, I mean, that's what we have to be able to do. We have to rely on our young guys to be able to provide depth. We have to play at a high level. And then our older guys have to be able to find a way to lead and play their best football when we need them to do that. And it's a fun group to coach. And I'm excited. I haven't been as excited for a training camp in a very long time because I love coaching this group of guys, this group of men. I love our coaching staff. I love where our coaching staff is. I love who our coaching staff is. I love how hard they work. I love our operational department. I love where our recruiting department is. And it takes a little while to get it exactly where you want it. It does. When you take new jobs, which was 2.5 years ago, there's new place. People fit, people don't fit, whether it's coaches, players. So it's worked out really well where I feel really good about our team going into camp. Most people do, but I think there's a difference between feeling good and really loving and liking that football team as a whole. And I appreciate and respect the work that everybody's put in the offseason.
PJ, is Rodney and Shannon both cleared?
Rodney's cleared. Shannon's not yet. He will be very shortly at some point, but he was behind Rodney because of the injury, and the extensive injury he had was a little bit different than Rodney. So, but he will be ready to go at some point.
Those situations typically work themselves out anyway.
They do.
If it doesn't work itself out, how do you handle three, running backs that have proven themselves?
Yeah, I think that, this isn't a sales job to anybody, right? I mean, we need to have running backs in the Big Ten. I think if you ask any head football coach, and I say I'll give you 5 to 6 running backs that can play, I don't think there's anyone that would turn that down. As physical of a conference as we're in, especially the teams that run the ball, as much as we run the ball as well, you want to have depth. Last year we had Rodney and Shannon go down, and everybody probably in this room had no idea what we were going to do. And it was complete panic, right? For us, it was like he's a really good running back. And he went in there and rushed for 1,100 yards and now made a big name for himself. He's at Big Ten Media Day all of a sudden, right? Bryce Williams comes in, has a tremendous camp. But when you have 5 or 6 guys that can really play, that's a good thing. You can get guys on the field possibly at different positions. You can have multiple guys on the field different times. And instead of one guy having 40 carries a game, you divide all that. And what we've described to them is, guys, that means you're healthier. That means as a team we're going to be better. Right? This is all about team. This is all about a championship. This is all about getting better collectively. And one thing I'm proud in that room is they're selfless. They see it. They get it. There hasn't been one statement made or one meeting with me as a player that said, Coach, I'm worried about my carries. I've never heard that. I've never heard Ty Johnson say, I'm worried about my catches. I've never seen it and heard it. And that's how you know you're getting a team-oriented team. And especially in that room. There's a lot of personality. There's one ball. Just like the quarterback, we're going to need them both. We're going to need all 4 somehow, some way. This is what a healthy football team with depth has. And Rodney understands that. Shannon understands that. Muhammad understands that. Bryce gets it. And even Cam Wiley, right? The young person from Las Vegas who I think when you look at him and see him, if you haven't seen him, he's probably as close to maybe a Lawrence Maroney body type that we've had in a long time, right? And then when you look at Trey Potts, no one's even seen him play yet, and he might be the most dynamic one out of all of them. So when you start to look at it, we have to be creative in how we can get them all on the field, but we also have to look at, okay, it's a long season. How can we divide the carries where in the fourth quarter, our guys are continually be healthy instead of our guys are wearing down. And now with a worn down defense, we can be able to continue to take over and dominate the game in our run game with multiple backs.
Where do you see the other safety next to Winfield, and where's Ty Newman going to start?
Yeah, Antoine Winfield Jr., he was just in my office. We had a wonderful conversation. He's got a big smile on his face. I mean, you talk about somebody who's really excited for camp, especially over the last 2 years, chomping at the bit to get back in there. So we obviously know what Antoine can do, and his challenge that I've given him is the leadership role, taking over that whole secondary. We know about Thomas Barber at the linebacker position, what he's become. We know about Carter Coughlin and Winston being how they take over that D-line. We need somebody to take over that secondary, and it's hard to do that when you're hurt. He knew that, but I can't wait for him to be able to kind of come out of his shell even more, lead the secondary, and I know he can do that, and we all know what he can do physically. The other spot is wide open, and that's going to be fun to watch grow. Whether, when you look at it, Calvin Swenson had a really good offseason, who's earned a scholarship here, who I think has done a great job of running our system and being efficient in what he does. You've got, Jordan Howden, who came in at the Maryland game last year and grew up really fast and ended up being really good at the end of the year. You've got a multitude of guys that can kind of help you out, especially the young players that have come in here. So the safety position is going to be a lot of fun to watch to see who can win that job. The nickel position's been wide open as well, but Chris Williamson has had a great offseason. We brought in a lot of other guys for the corner positions as well. That's a wide open competition. The corner position is what I'm looking forward to the most, to find out who's going to be able to solidify themselves as the 1 and 2 corners and then 3 and 4, because that's wide open.
Newman
Well, we'll see. Newbin is going to be able to play both at some point, but when you go out there day one, he'll be at corner to start, and then we'll just see. He came in our office the other day and said, hey, listen, I don't care if it's corner or safety. Recruiting is one thing. They sit there and say, I want to play this position in recruiting. Then they get here, and they're like, well, they look at it like, well, yeah, probably my best chance is to play safety or whatever the position is. Like, hey, can I play that position if I can get on the field? So we're going to play him at corner because my philosophy is you're athletic enough to play corner, and he's that big, we can get him to play safety pretty easily. So he might be one of the corners that start. We don't know. But he's going to be moved around and rotated. And a really smart, intelligent young man who I think can handle both, to learn both in a short amount of time. So we'll see how he does that.
Take one or two more. Coach, with the rise of analytics, how much room for innovation do you think there is in the college game, specifically from an in-game management standpoint and player evaluation?
Well, I think that analytics is a part of our game these days, right? But I also think no matter what it is, too much of a good thing is probably a bad thing. I always believe everything in moderation. You know, we have our own analytics. We rely heavily on it. I just gave you analytics with 78%, right, of how you go win football games. Most are lost. We're going to go find a way to win football games. But you got to know how to do that. And when you describe your team, it usually comes down to analytics. But again, there's still the game. You're still playing with people. You're not playing with plastic pieces. It's very different when you put the human element in any sport. So decision-making, there's books that say you should do this on this play when this situation occurs, unless you know your team better than that book, right? So there's all of those things that you're responsible for, the human element mixed with the analytics that can be used, right? Knowledge that is, I think, too much is useless knowledge because you forget it. You're not going to be able to use it immediately. Remember, this is about instincts when you got to make split-second decisions. You know, there's a lot of things I've done in my career. The book never says to do that, and we've been successful. There's some things that says I always do that, and I didn't do it, and it's been successful, or vice versa. So, you know, we're going to rely heavily on both, but don't ignore that human element. That's what makes this game really special.
Take one more, Chip. Go ahead.
How close did you come to losing Kirk Shiraka, and how important was it to keep that continuity?
Too close. Every year it's been close. Since I've known Kirk, it's just 7 years now we've had our relationship, and he's one of the greatest human beings I've ever met. He's one of the greatest football coaches I've ever been around. I learned most of my knowledge from him, being a young wide receiver coach under his tutelage. And it was a hard decision for him. You know, Neil Brown was his wide receiver coach as well. So you have the two young guys who are head coaches now, not fighting over him, but they both have great offers for him. But it was very close. At one point, I thought I did lose him. You know, he did call me and said, this is where I think I'm going to go, and for these reasons, and need a little bit more time. And then in the middle of the night, I mean, the phone rings, and usually in the middle of the night with a head coach and your phone rings, it's not the one you want to answer, and it's Kirk. So I'm like, what Kirk did at 2 a.m, right? And I call Kirk, I answer the phone, and Kirk's like, you still got that spot? And I said, well, absolutely. And he said, I really want to stay. I believe in what we're doing. I love this football team. I love where we live, and it's just not the right time. I really want to be with you. And one thing I always want our coaches to understand, I want them to have their dreams come true. I want them to move on. I want them to go be head coaches. I want them to do whatever they want to do. But that doesn't mean I'm going to let them go easily and not tell them how much they mean to me every single year. You know, Kirk Shiraka allows me to be the best head football coach I can be. That's the best compliment I can give him, because there was a time in my career where I wanted to do it all. And it was too much. And once a head coach, I think, starts trusting their people, they can be the best head coach. Their coordinators can be the best coordinators. And everybody can be the best themselves when the head coach focuses on being the head coach. Now, that's my own philosophy. That's worked for me. That might not be somebody else. But I've learned so much more about managing the game and being in charge of the game than just calling plays. And Kirk's so good at it. And he's proven that over the years of what he's been able to do with the offenses that we've been under. Together, I think we make a really good team. And I've said that from day one with him. We're very, very lucky to have him here. He's a wonderful offensive mind. And again, he makes me the best head coach I can be. But he's the best listener I've ever been a part of. It's hard to find with grown men in this profession. Great listeners. And I'm talking about listening to his staff, listening to the players, listening to me, listening to himself, how he can make himself better. He's got a passion for this game, passion for young people, and a passion for quarterbacks. And like I said, we're lucky to have him, and I'm very thankful that he stayed.
Okay, thank you.
We'll see you all at camp. Row the boat, Sky Ma. Go Gophers. Thanks, everybody.